The International Association of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgeons is pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Understanding and Leveraging Mindfulness in Your Practice and in Your Life, presented by Lori Schawnbeck. My name is Kimberly, and it is my pleasure to be the facilitator for today's event. I would like to formally welcome the participants joining us today. Please note today's call is being recorded, and all participant lines will be muted during this broadcast. If you experience technical difficulties with the web portion of today's program, please email IAOMS@compartners.com or send a message in the chat box. If you are listening to the program over the phone and you need assistance at any time, please press *0 and the operator will assist you. This presentation will last up to 60 minutes and will include question and answer opportunities. You may submit a question at any time by typing into the chat box in the lower left corner of the screen and clicking the send button. I would like to direct your attention to the links box located to the left of the screen where resources are located for your review, save, or print. Simply click on the link of your choice and a separate web browser window will open. This will not interfere with your viewing of the program. It is now my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Deborah Zabladil, who will introduce today's speaker.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Lori Schawnbeck to you all. You will greatly benefit from her wisdom throughout the course of the next hour. Lori is a senior facilitator and program designer with the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, where she delivers mindfulness and emotional intelligence trainings internationally in corporate, healthcare, education, and government settings. She has worked with organizations in Australia, Africa, Israel, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Canada, the U.S., Europe, and the U.K. Lori has a mindfulness-based clinical psychotherapy practice in San Francisco. In addition to working individually with clients, Lori trains healthcare providers in the integration of mindfulness and emotional intelligence skill building into their practices. She also designs and facilitates evidence-based well-being, resilience, and stress management programs for physicians and nurses at UCSF and Stanford hospitals. Lori holds a Bachelor's of Commerce from the University of Saskatchewan and an MA in Psychology from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. Lori, welcome.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Really happy to be here with you all today. And just a few beginning rules, actually, for our time together. As most of us are either on computer or phone, these tend to be devices that some of us might multitask or distract us. So since we'll be practicing attention training today, I want to start with inviting everyone to turn off other notification buttons if possible, really using this time to practice unitasking instead of multitasking. So if you could remove all distractions possible and really take this opportunity to really get the most out of our time together and focus. So that's how we're going to begin right away, by focusing on what we're going to be doing. So another way to begin is a practice right away that I call a minute to arrive. So what we'll be doing today is I'm going to be giving you some content and weaving in practices. So right away, this is going to be an opportunity for us to train our attention. So wherever you are, if you're sitting or standing, just take a moment right now and just feeling your body. Just noticing the sensation of perhaps sitting on a chair. You can be noticing that right now your body is breathing. And letting go of anything that was happening before and letting your mind pull back from anything that might be happening after this moment and really focusing right here, right now. We use our breath just to settle in. So letting go and dropping into this present moment. And just taking the next few breaths with full awareness, focusing on the sensation as you breathe in and you breathe out. Great. So some of you might have noticed that your attention was still wandering, and that's totally normal. But this is a micro practice I want to suggest that you can use at any time. So to begin a meeting, to begin sitting down with a patient, even when you open the door to your home after a day's work, just a minute to collect yourself and to fully be present. Oftentimes our thoughts are in the past or in the future, so this allows you to show up fully, whatever you are doing. So, why are we here today? Well, I think that certainly what I've seen in the healthcare field and in many fields is that we are at a time of unprecedented change. There's disruption in all fields, including healthcare. There's an expectation to do more with less resources. There's changes in policy, just changes in innovation. So this is a time where there is a lot of upheaval in our work life. Also finding in our personal life that there are constant demands on our attention, both at home and at work. We've got these devices that are fantastic. They let us do this training right now with people from around the world. We can communicate 24/7, but these devices are constantly pulling our attention, and the cost is quite significant in terms of our well-being, in terms of how we're able to show up with full attention in each moment. So research done at the Mayo Clinic by Kate Schoenfeld and John Noseworthy report that 50% of physicians meet at least one criteria of burnout. So while many causes for this are organizational, systemic, providing some support at the individual level is also important. So we have organizational changes, we have attention distractors, and we're facing a crisis in our healthcare systems of physician burnout. So these are the three characteristics that define burnout. The first is physical and emotional exhaustion. This is where we're feeling overwhelmed, stressed. There's a lack of energy to be consistently productive. You might notice changes in sleep patterns and appetite. This is a state where sometimes there's an excess of food or alcohol or other substances in order to kind of regulate ourselves, which actually create more problems than they're solving. You might also notice with burnout this quality of depersonalization. And this is where a cynical attitude and the kind of negativity or irritability towards our patients develops. The third criteria of burnout is a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So we negatively judge ourselves, our efforts, and there's a sense of hopelessness and helplessness about the outcomes of our effort. So I'd like to check in with you and just to see how you're doing with your state of stress and burnout. So here is a question that I'd like you to answer, and you can click on the box just for yourself right now. How stressed are you currently feeling? So from 1 to 5, 1 is you feel at ease most of the time, all the way to 5, and where you feel completely burned out, where you might be meeting one of those or many of those criteria of physical, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, or a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So if you could go ahead and just click where you fall in the scale. Okay, so seeing some big spread here. Some of you feel at ease most of the time, which is fantastic. Some of you are feeling somewhat burned out. And I'm glad to see that at least at this point in time, that there's no people reporting feeling completely burnt out, which is great. Quite a split here. So some of the things that we'll be talking about today will be helpful even if you're not feeling burnt out, just to support your overall base level of well-being. So when those inevitability stressors come in, that you'll be able to find a way to support yourself through the difficult times. So a few more data points here. It turns out that, of course, doctors and physicians aren't the only people in the healthcare field to feel burnt out. So there's a research done on nurses, and it turns out that nurses feel interrupted every 2 minutes. And this might be something that you're familiar with in your own work as well. They also report 75% of the time that they're feeling stressed and overworked currently, and a full 33% of them meet the full criteria for burnout. So, there is a crisis in our healthcare field, and actually national studies indicate that burnout is more common in physicians than in other fields, and that the gap between physician burnout and other workers' experience is increasing. So the spike in reported burnout is directly attributed to loss of emotional control over work, increasing performance measurements like quality, cost, patient experience, and the increasing complexity of medical care. So there's a lot of different factors. In some countries, I've also seen the electronic health records are really creating, it's a learning curve for sure, but it's an additional stressor that physicians are having to manage. So what to do about this? Certainly there are some systemic and organizational changes that would be beneficial and supportive. We're not going to be talking about that today. We're going to be looking at some of the personal supports. At the Mayo Clinic, there are skills trainings being brought in that support resilience, positive psychology, mindfulness, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. And these are some of the supports that you can implement in your life. So, categorically, what I'd say is what we'll be talking about today is emotional intelligence. And I want to give a definition of emotional intelligence here. And this is the ability to monitor or be aware of your own and others' feelings and emotions, and to discriminate amongst them or between them, and to use that information to guide when thinking and actions. So it's really about being smart about emotions and have that emotional intelligence and emotional awareness help guide your actions. And this is especially important in the environments that many of you are working in, where there are a lot of emotions, whether or not they're your own, but you've got emotions from patients, their families, from your colleagues, and often the anxiety is running high in the medical field. So the ability to have some discrimination about what's yours, what's other people's, and then to use that information to be skillful in how you interact is critical. So how are we going to do that? How we are going to do that today is we're going to talk about mindfulness. So when we're talking about emotional intelligence, really one of the core competencies within emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And self-awareness is knowing what I feel, when I feel it, what triggers it, and what the impulse to act is with that emotions. And mindfulness is a practice that we can do and employ to cultivate self-awareness. So self-awareness is foundational in the development of emotional intelligence. So let's look more deeply at mindfulness. So here is a definition of mindfulness from the Mindful Nation UK report. And they say that mindfulness means paying attention to what's happening in the present moment, in the mind, in the body, and in the external environment with an attitude of curiosity and kindness. So this is a quality of attention that's different from judgment, different from being reactive, being resistant. It's really about being open to what's happening right now And from that, then we can make skillful choices. And there's two components to mindfulness. The first is attention. And that is the ability to direct your attention to what you're focusing on. So whether it's a patient, whether it's your spouse when you come home, whether it's really focusing on charting. So that's the ability to focus intentionally on a chosen object. And of course, when we're doing that, our attention wanders, whether that's through daydreaming or worrying about what's happening next, or even our attention getting pulled by a phone call or a notification on our computer. When we notice that our attention has wandered, that's a moment of meta-attention. And our attention will always wander, so that's not necessarily a problem. But recognizing when it's wandering and then intentionally choosing to bring it back to what you want to focus on, that is what mindfulness practice is all about. So we liken it to mental training. It's training of the mind. And attention is like a muscle. So you can build that muscle, you can strengthen that muscle by specifically and intentionally choosing what to focus on. When your attention wanders, bringing it back. So it's a very simple 4-step practice, actually. Focusing attention, noticing when your attention has wandered, reorienting attention, and then settling into what you're focused on. It's simple, but not easy to do. So just to be really clear, when we're focusing attention, we can be aware of what's happening in our mind. We can focus on our thoughts. We can focus on the sensations in our body, or we can focus on something outside of ourselves. And that might be a task that we're doing. It might be an interaction with a patient. It might be an interaction with a coworker. So our awareness can be trained to internal processes or external processes. And the attitude of that attention is one of kindness and one of curiosity. So there's a quality of openness to this attention. It's not that attention that, is scrutinizing or judging or finding fault with. We're really wanting to cultivate this capacity to notice what's happening internally and externally with a quality of openness. So basically, it is a training in how to be fully present. And we all might know the benefits of being present with our patients. But it turns out that being present with colleagues is just as important, with family members, but also with ourselves at specific times, to really know what we're thinking, what we're feeling, and what's most important to us. But that ability to be able to choose what you pay attention to and when you pay attention to it is really what we're looking at when we're talking about cultivating attentional control. So, another quick poll here. Just curious about how many of the people on the call today actually do have some practice where they are cultivating attentional control and using this for stress management. So that could be a meditation practice, it could be yoga practice, maybe Tai Chi or time in nature. So just want to see people on the call, how many of you are doing some practice where you're cultivating this quality of attention? Okay. And we've got this split. A lot of people rarely, yeah. And some are doing it several times a week. It's an interesting phenomena I've noticed as I've spoken with people around the world is often we don't think or don't know that we can actually train our attention. We can actually do activities that support this attentional training and that actually it has the benefit of managing stress and increasing our well-being. So it's great. For those of you who say that you rarely have done it, hopefully our time today will inspire you to try it a little bit more. So let's actually do some practice. So this is going to be a mindfulness training and focusing our attention. So I'm going to guide you through this. We'll do this for about 5 minutes. So again, as I invited you to do at the beginning, really want you to make sure that you're focusing in here, using this as an opportunity to train your attention, so turning off any notifications and not multitasking right now. And you can do this sitting or standing. You can do this with your eyes open or closed. If you have your eyes open, just really want to invite you to have a soft gaze downward. Oftentimes, when our eyes are open, it's very easy to get distracted by visual stimuli. So if you can, closing your eyes, and we're going to do a few minutes of attention training practice, soft gaze downward. Let's just begin by taking a few nice, big, deep inhalations and exhalations, just as a way of settling the mind, gathering attention, and just noticing the sensations in the body. So if you're sitting, you might notice the pressure of the chair underneath you. If you're standing, you might notice your feet against the floor and the pressure on the bottoms of your feet. And just allowing your body to sit in a way where you can feel both relaxed and alert. So having your spine nice and erect, not stiff, but not slouched down. And let's just turn attention now to the sensation of breathing. So just feeling the sensation of breath. So you might notice as you inhale, there could be a slight tingling in the nose. You might feel the sensation of the belly and chest rising and falling. You might be aware of the sensation of air. As you exhale, might feel warmer than on the inhale. So just bringing attention very simply to one focal point, which is the sensation of breath. And your attention will wander, and that's okay. When it does, just coming back, finding the breath, and just noticing, what does this breath feel like in the body? Feeling the breath moving in and out. You might notice the pauses in between the inhalation and exhalation. And just seeing if you can let your attention follow one full cycle of breath. So noticing right in the moment the inhalation happens, the pause, the exhale, and then again. Focusing attention, and when your mind wanders, just bringing it back, training attention on the breath, feeling the body breathing. Sometimes it helps to count the breath, breathing in to 1, exhaling to 1, breathing into 2. And for the last minute of practice, no matter how far your attention has wandered, just seeing if you can bring it right back. Simply training attention like a spotlight, feeling the next inhalation and exhalation, training your attention to rest on the breath. And as the body continues to breathe, you might notice again the feeling of the body sitting on the chair, You might open your attention now and noticing sounds in the room around you. You might be aware of the temperature on your skin. And if your eyes are closed, you can open them and just notice what comes into your visual world, just training your attention to be right here. Okay. I want to open it up if there are any comments or questions. Is that practice, a simple 5 minutes of training attention? Just curious what that was like for people. What did you notice? And there's no right answer here. Just curious, what was that attention training practice like? So Deborah, if you could let me know if there are any comments, questions.
I will. Watching the comment box, if everyone can just take to the audience question box. Happy to read your comments. One
question of
person
how many.
said it felt very calming.
Very calming.
Peaceful, very peaceful.
Okay. I'm curious about how many people found it difficult to do, actually.
Mm-hmm. Another person says it was difficult to not let the mind wander.
Mm-hmm. I just want to comment about that. The mind will wander. Sometimes there's this misperception about meditation or mindfulness practice that you're supposed to stop your thoughts, have no thoughts. And actually, that's mostly impossible for most of us. Our attention is always, our mind generates thoughts just like our stomach, generates digestive juices. We are constantly generating thoughts. The purpose of attention training is to notice when those thoughts take us away from the present moment and to come back and just say, okay, that's a moment of mindfulness, that meta-awareness. My mind has wandered, and coming back to what is happening in the present moment. Where is my attention most needed? Most often our attention is needed right here in the present moment. And our attention often gets carried away by rumination, worrying, anxiety. So it's great that you notice that your attention wanders, because that's what happens. And when you notice it, you just bring it back.
We had two more comments, Lori. One said, it is really hard to be focused, but it was relaxing. Mm-hmm. And another person said, it is easy for me. So maybe that's a person that practices quite a bit.
Well, I will say that I've been practicing a lot, and sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's really hard. Mm-hmm. The times it's really hard are those times generally when I actually feel like a strong emotional pull, because when we feel strong emotions or when there's a lot going on around us, it's actually the attention very easily gets pulled into what has the most charge for us. And so that is a time when I have to really constantly be refocusing on what is most important in the present moment. It's also hard when I'm tired, honestly, and when I'm overwhelmed. So sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, and not to judge ourselves when that happens. That's really critical in this practice. Okay, great. We'll be doing a couple more practices, and I want to, before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of the practice. And a few of you mentioned that there is calm and focus, and that's great, and certainly that's those are two things that we can cultivate. There's some studies here that just point to some of the benefits of some studies done on mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is an 8-week program. And 80 nurses who went through a mindfulness-based stress reduction program found that they had reports of decreased emotional exhaustion and decreased depersonalization. Again, that is that characteristic of burnout where you feel a sense of apathy or indifference towards your patients. The study also looked at, another study looked at 122 nurses and found that after an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program, they scored higher on emotional intelligence scores related to lower burnout during chronic stress as well. So they had a subjective feeling of lower burnout and rated higher on emotional intelligence scores. And so a couple of you commented that you felt more calm just by that brief practice that we did and had more clarity. And certainly that's what people find when they practice, is that mind is like a snow globe. And like a snow globe, you shake it up and there's a swirl of thoughts, worry thoughts, anxiety thoughts about the future, ruminating about the past. And that's like can obstruct our mind and kind of take over. So meditation and mindfulness practice is like setting down the snow globe. And when we settle it and set it down, we see that the flakes disappear, those swirling thoughts begin to calm. And with that, we can actually have more clarity into what's most important to us. We have the ability to see into ourselves without the distraction of the worry thoughts. And ultimately, this can lead to our own personal well-being. Because, we can be in the most beautiful place in the world, but if our mind is worrying and obsessing, it's hard to feel happy. So the practice of training our mind really helps us to be in the present moment and access these states that support our well-being. So I want to offer us another practice right now, and this is a micro-practice. So, we did this 5-minute attention training a few minutes ago. You can also do it in a much quicker way. So this is another opportunity for us to practice. So I'm going to ask you right now to focus on 3 breaths, and the instructions are this. In the first breath, I'm going to ask you to pay full and complete attention to your breath. The second breath will be to relax your body. And then the third breath, to ask yourself a question. What's most important now? Okay, so 3 breaths. Each breath has a different instruction to it. So let's go ahead and practice right now. So going ahead, the first breath is paying full and complete attention to the breath. Second breath, relaxing the body. And the third breath, what's most important now? And just seeing what arises. So, that is a practice that you can do with your eyes open. You can do it with your eyes closed, but you can do it with your eyes open. And it's a fantastic practice to refocus your attention before you are about to begin something new. So it could be before you see a new patient. It could be when you arrive home and you want to let go of a stressful day at work. It could be when you are about to meet with a coworker, colleague, someone on your team. So the question, what's most important now, helps refocus attention and prepare you for what's next. So don't have to close your eyes for that, and you can weave that in throughout your day. So a quick note here, a couple more studies. One of the exciting things that has come in the field of neuroscience in the last decade or so is this discovery of neuroplasticity, which is the fact that our brain is constantly changing and rewiring based on experience. And the relevance of this to emotional intelligence development is it turns out that training our attention and intentionally paying attention as we've been practicing can change the structure and function of our brains in ways that support emotional intelligence. So let's look at a few studies that indicate this. So this first study looks at something called the default mode network. And the default mode network, as some of you may know, is related to mind wandering and self-referential thinking. So our brain at rest when it's not intentionally given something to focus on, tends to ruminate, tends to have a lot of thoughts about yourself, like what I did wrong, anticipating what I need to do in the future. And sometimes this is okay, but our brain can get stuck here in a way that's actually not helpful, because this is the realm of obsessive thinking, of a lack of creativity. And so research has found that during meditation practice, the default mode network is less active, and that this translates after practice in that there's greater connectivity after practice between other attention or other areas of the brain which are connected to attention management, even when at rest, even when not practicing meditation. So this is really supportive of a healthy brain functioning. Another study done in 2013 showed that with meditation practice, mindfulness meditation practice, the parts of the brain, specifically the salience network and the amygdala, indicated less reactivity and less firing in anticipation to a stressor. So you'll see on these graphs here that the study had participants given a mild dose of pain. It was a heat sensor that was applied to the skin. And they knew that they were getting this application of heat. But you'll see in this first graph here that there is less anticipation of the pain with the long-term meditators, which is the blue here. The red here is the experienced meditators. The blue are the novice meditators, and that the experienced meditators had less amygdala activation in anticipation of the pain. And you'll see here on the next graph on the right here that when the pain was applied, they had a pretty similar reaction to the pain, so it's not like that there's no feeling. But then after the pain was distributed and there was no pain, you see that the experienced meditators, again, this in the red here, had less activation of the amygdala. So they were able to really be in the present moment. They weren't anticipating the stress, and once the stress was done, they were able to return back to baseline more quickly. And I think this is really critical when we think about how our mind often anticipates a stressor or worry in the future, or ruminates on it after it's done. You can see how that contributes to stress, decreases our well-being, because we're constantly in this anticipation of distress state. So a meta-analysis was done of all mindfulness research and found that there are very specific changes in brain regions associated with these three areas of the brain. Parts of the brain that are responsible for attentional control, so being able to focus, primarily that's the prefrontal cortex, the ability to regulate emotion, so down-regulate that amygdala activation, and the area of increased self-awareness. So these are all components of emotional intelligence. So one more practice here. We're going to just stop again and take a reset pause. And again, this is something that you can do throughout your day. So very simply, we're getting even more simply as we go through these practices. This is the instructions for this. You can keep your eyes open, and all we're going to do is, for the next 2 breaths, just bring your attention fully and completely to the sensation of breathing. So I'm going to stop talking, and for the next 2 breaths, all you need to do is pay attention to your breath. Okay, so very brief 2-breath practice. And you can do that. I just noticed for myself, in speaking about the science and in my head thinking about it, that reset just allowed me to settle, refocus, and to keep moving on. And again, this is something that allows us to reconnect with the present moment when we start noticing that meta-awareness that our thoughts might be spinning, out of control, we can just do that. Simply finding the breath, just 1 or 2 breaths, regulates the nervous system, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, and calms us down. So you can take this pause many times throughout your day. It just allows a little more clarity, a little more peace. Just resetting all day long will just help you support well-being. So I want to talk about one more application of mindfulness practice, and this is in the area of our relationships. So being a physician requires navigating many relationships, and interpersonal effectiveness is part of emotional intelligence. We need to get along with our colleagues, we need to interact with patients, our families, and patients' families as well. It also turns out that the quality of our own relationships has a significant impact in our own levels of well-being. So I want to just ask again, here's another poll. How often do you turn to others, whether it's colleagues or family or friends, for work-related support and for stress management? How often do you find yourself resourcing through relationships in your life? So just you can check this poll. Rarely turn to others, occasionally, sometimes, or very often. How important are other people in your stress management toolbox? Okay. Occasionally. Okay. So it turns out that not only are we working a lot with people, we also need people to help us feel good in life. So being skillful with people and not acting out is really critical. So learning some skills of how to react instead of responding when we're in the midst of distress is important. I want to share a story. I was working in Dakar with the United Nations and working with a physician who was doing some HIV work. And as many of the UN employees are, this doctor, she had great empathy and great patience for her patients, was able to regulate well and to not show signs of stress. But often it was with her colleagues and coworkers where a lot of her distress came up. And she was reactive, she was short with them, and she was especially triggered when she found that her colleagues were not being efficient. And it turns out that her irritability and reactivity made the people around her on edge, and they were more stressed. So because of that, they were actually making more mistakes around her. And, you know, it was this loop where she was stressed, she was reacting with others, that got them more stressed, and they were making more mistakes. So when I was working with her, we did this reset pause and had her really focus on finding her breath, settling herself down, and really refocusing before speaking so she could really be present with her colleagues. And what she found is that when she was able to calm herself, she became more approachable, she was less irritable with others, and people, of course, then were less nervous around her and ultimately performed better. Another thing, actually, she did is she closed her computer screen down when her colleagues would come into her office just to really indicate that she was really being present. So that was really supporting her showing up with full presence. So I want to do another practice with you that can really help, because oftentimes our stress and reactivity with colleagues or with other people in our life, in our personal life, can create problems. So here is a practice. It's called a stop practice. So this is a way of working with our emotions when it comes to how we're interacting with others. So the S in stop stands for when you're feeling triggered, when you're feeling reactive, just stop. The T is for take a breath. The O is observing what is happening in the moment. And then P is then proceeding with wisdom. So it's a very short practice. So we stop when we're triggered. we take a breath. That's activating the parasympathetic nervous system. When that happens, we have more access to the thinking part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. We're able to take in other people's perspectives more. There's more flexibility, more creativity in our thinking. We observe what's happening, so we're stepping outside of our own reactivity. And then we can take action. We can proceed with wisdom. So I'm going to lead us in a little practice to try this out just now. So I'd like you to think of a time when you were really stressed or distressed with a patient or a colleague or coworker. And maybe just think about what you could have done. Like, what would it have been like if you were just to stop? So bring that moment in time where you were frustrated with a coworker or patient, seeing it in your mind's eye, and just maybe bring up that moment where you felt that irritation or frustration, that being triggered. And what happens right now when you just take a breath, shining the breath, observing what's happening in your own body, getting out of the story of why this person is right or wrong. And then just ask yourself, how could you proceed with more wisdom? What would be useful for you to proceed with? What outcome do you ultimately want in this? So, if I was working with you individually or face-to-face, we might take a few moments and break that down. And maybe some of you tried it right now and you still got reactive, and maybe some of you were distracted. But that is, I want to just leave you with that as a practice to try. When you are triggered, just stop. Stop, take a breath, observe what's happening, not the stories of why this person is right or wrong, and then make a choice. How do I want to react? How do I want to choose to respond? How do I want to proceed? And that is emotional intelligence in action. So a couple of other practices just to leave you with before we open to questions. Mindfulness is something that you can use your breath to do. You can do that in the moment 3-breath practice. You can practice longer attention training. And you can also practice mindfulness with anything you do. So hand washing, just bringing your attention to the sensation of what does the soap feel like? What does the water feel like? It's a way of resetting, refocusing, calming the mind by training attention on the sensations of what's happening in your hands as you wash your hands. It could be as you walk down the corridor between patient to patient. It could even be the sensation of moving your body and walking and looking around at the trees before you get into your car at the end of the day. So it's really about training attention. I have my group of doctors at Stanford. They're fortunate enough to have a really lovely walk from the campus to their cars, and it's their way of letting go of the stress of the day to just focus on the trees outside themselves, the hills, the sunshine. So they're integrating a walking practice as a way to refocus attention, to de-stress at the end of the day. So this just allows your mind to rest, allows you to show up and be fully present for what's next. So we very quickly went over several practices today, and if you're curious about deepening into this and trying more, there are many apps that you can do and use. That very simply is just to find your breath, focusing on one thing in the present moment, and that allows you to show up, to refresh yourself, and you might notice a long-term benefit in stress management. The mindfulness of breath, the 3-breath practice, focusing on the breath, focusing on relaxing the body, and then asking that question, what's most important now? Giving yourself a minute to arise, so transitioning and showing up. Stop practice, what do you do so that you're not reactive to another person? And then mindful walking or mindful hand washing. So those are some practices that we briefly went over, and I want to open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Lori. Fantastic, fantastic content. And we are now opening up for questions. So if you'd like to take to the question box and ask any questions that you may have of Lori in these last few minutes. First question that has come in is, are you aware of any hospitals or health systems that provide mindfulness training for patients, particularly those with chronic disease?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that there, are many being offered in different hospitals. Nothing is coming up specifically right now. I would say many. I know that there's a lot of pain management programs being offered. I believe that Stanford and UCSF, from my knowledge, are offering mindfulness training. Kaiser in California is definitely offering some. University of Toronto Training Hospital has got mindfulness programs as well. So I can do some research and get back to you and provide that information for you if that would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how would I begin to manifest a mindfulness philosophy in my facility that is currently a somewhat chaotic and stressed atmosphere?
Sounds like you're working in a pretty normal atmosphere in the healthcare world. I think that a couple of things. First, starting with yourself. The more you're able to weave in practices and cultivate your own calmness, your own clarity, people are going to start to hopefully notice, and they might be curious. I've got a nurse that I work with actually in northern Canada who is just checked out with other nurses that are interested in mindfulness practice again, and they actually go into one of the treatment rooms and close the door, and they have like a 15-minute practice. So it's finding other people who are interested and allowing some time to practice. I've got other teams in other hospitals who, before they do their huddle at the beginning or end of a shift, they have a minute of practice just to settle the mind. So it's woven into how teams and how huddles are, how people are connecting in their teams and huddles. So it's doing it yourself, finding other people who are interested in trying to find maybe even 5 minutes to do it, have people come together, and integrating it in your huddles or with team meetings and colleagues, just that minute to arrive practice, and then people start to get interested.
Great. Next question is, where does someone find an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction workshop? Is it one organization that offers it, or are they offered in various places?
Great question. There are people around the world who are trained facilitators of this. So you can just do a search online and in your area, and depending on where you live, there definitely are many, many, many people who are now trained and to facilitate mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. And there are some that are done online as well. So it's just a matter of doing a search in your geographic area. Just type in MBSR trainings.
Great, thank you. It looks like that concludes our questions. Thank you so much, Lori, for such an informative and wonderful hour that we were all able to really focus and hopefully be mindful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. And just as we close, just want to take another minute, if we can, just to practice. So before we rush off to the next thing, as many of us might already be doing, let's just take a minute and find the breath just for 3 breaths. Just allowing us to let go of this so that we can begin our next thing with full presence. Great. All right, so thank you very much, and I encourage you all to keep practicing and try out for yourself and see what the benefits for your own life may be.
Thank you, Lori. And with that, we'll conclude today's program. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation in the links box on the left side of your screen. Your feedback is very important to us. This session has been recorded and will be available within the week. You may access the recorded archive on the IAOMS website. On behalf of the International Association of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgeons, thank you to our speaker and, of course, all of today's participants. Have a great weekend. You may now disconnect.